at the moment, so it looks like we can move forward.
Okay, good. So I'm going to move into loans and talking about loans a little bit. There are, one thing that I'll just say about loans in general, there are federally subsidized loans and then there are non-federally subsidized loans, and I would strongly encourage everyone to stay away from the non-federal loans. They don't have the protections. They've often, I've heard nightmares about that being a predatory lending environment, much like what we saw in the mortgage lending environment, a few years back, that the terms and the rates can be very, very punitive for the borrowers. And so with that in mind, I would strongly encourage anybody to stick with federal loans. So the three types of loans that are federally backed or part of the federal program are the Perkins loan, which that is basically for type 1 families. You're going to have to qualify. They can, it's definitely for the needy student. So I didn't put up an awful lot of information up here about this, but if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to follow up with them about that. Some of the more interesting loans for us to talk about here today are the federal Stafford loans, and it's a fixed rate. And you'll notice here that that there are limits of what you can borrow depending on what year of school you're in. And you'll also notice that there are subsidized and unsubsidized portions. So what I'll say is for all of these federally subsidized loan or federally loans through the federal program, they no payments are required to be made while the student is in school. There are some rules to follow, but in general, as long as the student is at least 50%, i.e. 12 units or more, then there are no payments that are required until graduation, and then there's a 6-month, what do I want to say, grace period before repayment is started. So you'll note that the subsidized loans, they have a 3.4 at present. The interest rate is 3.4%, and it's it's got a lower limit for the freshmen. You can borrow up to $3,500, and those subsidized loans do not accrue interest while the student is in school. The unsubsidized do accrue interest, but in both cases, payments are not required to be made until the 6 months after graduation. So one thing that I'll note, if anybody's been paying attention, and then I'll post a link on our Facebook page. President Obama recently did an address about these federal subsidized loans. That right now the subsidized portion is 3.4%, and that will double come July unless Congress acts to fix it. Of course, we're caught up in a political discussion about it, and so time will tell if that's going to double or not, but it's just something to be aware of. That's what the environment is like right now, and we just monitor it as time goes on. So dropping down to the PLUS loans, that's another federal program. The interest rate is a little bit higher. The parents, these are typically the parent loans. With the Stafford loan, it can be the parent or the child who does the borrowing, but the parents can borrow all the way up to the cost of attendance, less any other financial aid, and the payments are deferred until after graduation. So does anybody have any questions at this point?
Actually, Debbie, we have two questions.
Okay.
One is pertaining to what you're talking about right now, and then we'll back up and ask another question. What determines the interest rate variation of 6.8% compared to 3.4%?
Great question. So the 3.4% interest rate applies to the subsidized portion of the loan. So in the example of the freshman, the 3.4 would apply to the $3,500 but if you wanted to borrow up to the 5,500, then the 6.8 would apply.
Okay, great. And then I wanted to back up real quick to the student income once again, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
We have a question. Would it be in the best interest of the student to not have a job when applying? And if so, how long do they need to be out of work? Is it just not employed at the time of the application, or how does that work?
That's a great question. So, the way that the FAFSA works is you complete the FAFSA. It was just due, I think in March was the due date, and it's based, actually it can't be March, it's later, it's right now, it's in the spring is when the FAFSA is done, and it's backwards looking. So if you have a student who is going off to school, let's just say they're a freshman this fall, so their school year would be 2012, 2013. That FAFSA information for that school year would be based on 2011's income information. So
Okay.
it's somewhat retroactive looking. So if in 2011 they didn't work, in 2012 they did, it wouldn't be included for their upcoming year. However, in the subsequent year, it would be included. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions at this point?
Not at this point.
Okay. Good. Let's see. So, moving on from those. So, the next tool that we like to take a look at and plan around is a little help from Uncle Sam, i.e. education deductions and credits. So the important point I'd make here is pointing out over on the right-hand column, the income phase-outs. And so the first credit that we have on the chart is the American Opportunity Credit. And basically what that says is that for every dollar you spend, you get 40 cents of a credit. So 40% of every qualified education dollar you spend, you get a 40% credit up to $4,000 or you get the credit tops out at $2,500. However, if you're a type 3 family, then your income, and your income is going to exceed $160,000, then you're not eligible for this credit. Similar with the lifetime learning credit, and that is for every dollar of qualified educational expense you have, you get a 20% credit. So up to $10,000, you have to spend up to $10,000 to get the full credit there. However, that's got a much lower phase out. So an important point about these credits, you really want to work with a tax professional and be aware of the rules, because you can't combine them. You can take one or the other. However, if you have two students in school at the same time, one student can take one and the other can take the other. And there's just some rules to be around, but it's one of the tools that we definitely want to look at when we're putting together the planning, and especially obviously when we're in the late stage, when we're focused on mitigating and reducing the cost. The savings bonds, we talked about those as one of the options earlier. Just note here that there is a phase out. Coverdale, same thing. And student loans, we just talked about student loans. The interest that you pay on those student loans is deductible up to $2,500. However, as you can see here, we do have the phase out. So if it's a married filing joint, if you have income over $120,000, then that's going to you're not going to be eligible. Anybody have any questions about this part?
I'm not seeing any yet. I'm trying to see if someone's going to type anything in, but not at the moment. So we may want to just come back to it.
Okay, so what I'll say, if anybody's typing questions, what I'll say about this is that the credits, the American Opportunity Tax Credit and the Lifetime Learning Credit, both of those are set to expire at the end of 2012. They often are written back into the tax law and extended. However, it's not a guaranteed thing. Like with most things, when we're putting a plan together, we plan with what we know and what we have before us right now. But in 3-4 years, these credits might look considerably different, and it's just part of our public policy and the fun with the tax law that we get to look at each year. Okay.